On my 50th birthday, in front of the entire family, my daughter gave me nothing and said it was on purpose. The words landed like glass breaking in my chest. For a moment, no one touched the food. The roast beef smell hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sweet frosting of the untouched cake in the center of the table. The chandelier above us flickered weakly, casting thin shadows across every face pressed around the dining table. Tara leaned back in her chair, one elbow hung lazy over the armrest. She shrugged, almost proud. "You don't need anything. You're already old." Silence stretched. Then, a nervous laugh broke from my cousin Mark, sharp and stunted. He clapped once, like it might make the insult feel like a joke. Someone cleared their throat. A knife scraped against a plate, metal on porcelain piercing the quiet. The front door creaked with the wind outside, though nobody came or went. My wife, Linda, shifted in her seat. Her eyes didn't rise from her lap. Her hands pinched at the napkin, wringing it until the edges frayed. Across from me, Linda's sister smirked, as if enjoying the moment. I looked down at the glass stem trembling between my fingers. Wine rippled inside, catching the light like a red thread about to snap. Beside the cake, a sealed white envelope sat untouched, its edges sharp under the chandelier glow. I had noticed Tara's hands brush past it earlier, quick and dismissive, like it wasn't hers to acknowledge. My pocket watch pressed cool against my vest. I didn't check the time then, but my mind stored it anyway. Later in that night, when I wrote it down, I fixed the exact minute, 7:23 p.m. Her wording, for the record. Nobody rushed to ease the silence. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room, steady, relentless. To me, it sounded louder than any of their shallow chuckles. Inside, a calculation started. Not anger, not humiliation, not the kind they expected anyway. I was noting faces, recording the tilt of voices, their silences and smirks, each detail like a ledger entry. Tara's smirk, Linda's refusal to look, Mark's awkward laugh, each one logged quietly in the space only I could access. I took a breath, set the glass down without drinking it, and nodded once. Okay. My tone calm, almost gentle. It made some of them relax, as if the moment had passed. But it hadn't. Music stuttered back on from the small speaker near the sideboard, too low to cover the scrape of silverware. Tara was already scrolling her phone, face lit by the neon rectangle, smothering whatever discomfort still lingered in the room. I smiled politely. I asked if anyone wanted more potatoes. I offered to slice the cake even though no one had touched it yet. My voice casual, steady, enough to move them past it. Outwardly, the insult was over. Inside, it was the start. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the pocket watch, the familiar tick like a breath against my palm. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to demand. I had something stronger than an outburst. I had patience, and I had memory. Every insult will be counted, I told myself silently, eyes still fixed on the white envelope, and nothing will be forgotten. The meal limped forward, forks scraped, glasses clinked. The chatter returned, disjointed and shallow, louder than it needed to be. A chorus of small distractions to cover up what had just happened. But the air in the room had shifted. The placement of the chairs, the uneven light of the chandelier, the shadows stretching toward the unopened cake. The cards on the sideboard no one bothered to hand me. I saw all of it in sharp relief. At 7:29, Tara rose halfway to toast with a glass of soda, halfway mocking. "Here's to Dad, 50 years and still breathing." She didn't finish the sentence. She laughed at her own joke. A few others forced small laughs too. I didn't raise my glass. I only watched. Later, after dinner seeped into coffee and casual chatter, I stood in the doorway of the living room, half in shadow. Tara sat curled on the couch with two cousins, her phone bright in her hand. She laughed easily with them, as if the sting of her words had already vanished, as if it never meant anything. I stayed silent in the shadows. No speech, no correction, no plea for respect, because silence has its own weight. It moves slower, but farther. My hand brushed past the sealed envelope on the sideboard one last time before I left the room. Unopened, waiting. They thought it ended here. It didn't. The rain that night tapped against the basement windows like a clock that refused to stop. It was steady, measured, almost too precise. I sat alone at my old oak desk, the lamp throwing a weak circle of yellow across the papers spread around me. My pocket watch ticked in my vest, its rhythm matching the drops outside. Somewhere upstairs, the refrigerator hummed. Otherwise, silence. That's when the memories pressed in, one after another. The cost of years. Back in 2001, when Tara was 13, I worked nights in a warehouse packing freight. The fluorescent lights inside buzz so loud, I still hear them sometimes when I close my eyes. During the day, I hauled lumber at a construction site outside Kansas City. The smell of gasoline and wet sawdust clung to my skin, no matter how hard I scrubbed at the sink. My hands cracked so deep, I had to tape my palms shut just to keep lifting boxes. And yet, every Friday night, I walked into the bank and signed another tuition check. I remember the paper sliding across the counter, the ink of my name still blotchy from the pen, page after page, receipt after receipt. Kansas State had been my plan. I had even been accepted. Civil engineering. But I canceled without hesitation so she could have hers. No regrets, I told myself every morning when I laced my boots. I still hold the stained ledgers from those years. January 14th, 2002. $1,240 for books. May 2nd, 2003. $2,820 for summer classes. Every entry recorded in my handwriting, neat even when my hands shook from fatigue. But looking back, the signs of erasure had already begun. One cold February evening, Tara's high school held its award night. She stood proud on stage, microphone in hand, beaming at the crowd. "I couldn't have done this without my mom paying my fees," she said. The applause roared. I sat 3 rows back, clapping like nothing was wrong. I never corrected her. Not that night, not any night. I told myself, she's young, she doesn't realize, but I knew. Years later, another red flag. It was 2008, late fall. I had pneumonia that nearly kept me in the hospital. I remember lying in bed, window cracked open for air, the smell of damp leaves drifting in. My breath rattled like gravel in my chest. I expected her. A call, a knock on the door. Nothing. She was in Florida with her friends, a trip she funded by draining her summer wages and, I discovered later, dipping into my checking account. Linda told me not to push her. She's living her life. That was the phrase. So I coughed alone, sipped water, alone. The ledger by my bed kept track of my prescriptions instead of tuition that month. Another memory, warmer weather this time. Our neighborhood block party, July 4th, 2012. Fireworks earlier. Now, sparklers died in the grass. People circled with drinks and folding chairs. Tara, smiling too wide, said loud enough for the cul-de-sac, "Honestly, Dad's more like a roommate than a father." Laughter rippled. I just turned my hot dog in the bun and took another bite. Salt, mustard, ash in the air. I said nothing, but I marked it. Year after year, I kept silent watch. Across decades, those silences turned into objects now stacked in my basement. A shoebox filled with letters. Some I wrote to her at camp, some birthday cards I bought and she tossed unopened. I kept them anyway, sealed proof of effort unreturned. In the bottom drawer, misfiled between tax folders, I once came across a 2010 addendum to my will. It named her as primary heir in language I barely remembered signing. Curious, too clean. I slid it back then, untreated, but the memory stayed. Receipts filled another file, property tax stamps, 2015 through 2019. Every bill paid solo after Linda refused to sign. My initials on each one, check numbers circled. Validation of responsibility. Then there's the smallest reminder, yet the one I feel most. A brass storage locker key taped under my desk drawer. I forgot it for years until the tape began to peel, letting the metal drop against the wood with a soft rattle. That sound took me back to the beginning, to what I built and what I risked losing. Even amidst all that, I remember the mundane sacrifice most clearly. Folding laundry at 2 a.m. Tara asleep upstairs, the television still buzzing softly in the corner. the smell of detergent filling the narrow hallway, my hands carefully matching socks, stacking shirts as my body ached. For sleep. I didn't complain, not once. That was the shape of my devotion, quiet, unremarked on, unrewarded. And yet, sitting there with rain ticking hard against the basement glass, I realized my silence wasn't weakness. It never was. It was storage, evidence building itself in plain sight. Every card I kept, every receipt stamped, every date I logged. It was the opposite of forgetting. It was preparation. I opened my leather ledger, the one I used for 30 years, and began rewriting. On the left page, the dates of sacrifice. On the right, the dates of disrespect. The columns balanced in a way I had never forced myself to see before. Sacrifice April 2002. Night shift plus tuition check. Disrespect. May 2002. Mom paid it all. Sacrifice October 2008. Hospital bills. Disrespect October 2008. Florida trip. Sacrifice July 2012. Block party cleanup. Disrespect. July 2012. Roommate, not a father. The numbers looked ugly when they faced each other. By the time the wall clock hit 12:47 a.m., my right hand cramped. The rain hammered harder, then slowed to drips. I could smell damp concrete and dust rising from the basement floor. My pocket watch ticked steady as ever, pressed against my ribs like a metronome for this accounting. I closed the ledger calmly, no anger in me, just precision. For the first time, I understood my role. I wasn't meant to argue. I wasn't meant to explain. I was meant to record. My silence was not surrender. It was evidence. And when the time came, it would speak louder than any words. I set the pen down, rubbed the callus at the center of my palm, and slid the ledger back carefully. Everything neat, everything dated. My hand was steady despite the storm outside. Nothing. That's what she gave me right there at the table. My 50th birthday. My family sitting shoulder to shoulder around the dining room. Roast beef cooling in the center. Cake untouched. Wine breathing in tall glasses. I turned my head and asked, calm, almost curious. Nothing? Tara leaned forward, her fork tapping against her plate. Why waste money on you? I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. The pocket watch in my vest ticked against my chest, steady as my breath. Noted, I said quietly. Her lips curled into a smirk. Don't act hurt. Be grateful we showed up at all. A silence opened, wide, thick. My uncle on the far end broke it with a short nasal snort, like laughter he didn't know how to stop. The sound floated in the low light, embarrassing both of us. Then it happened. At 7:35 p.m., recorded in my mind like a file date, the crystal wine glass fell. No warning. It toppled from the edge of the table, struck the tile floor, shattered into silver shards that scattered under the chairs. Everyone drew breath sharply. Someone muttered, "Just an accident." But it marked the break. I watched, not the glass, but the people. Mark chuckled nervously, reaching for his napkin. My wife, eyes fixed, down, not meeting mine. My sister-in-law smirking into her drink. Tara! She kept her gaze on her phone, thumb swiping bright across the screen, unmoved. I tightened my hand around the stem of my own glass, then released it. The table smelled of roast meat and sugared frosting, dulled fast by the sharp odor of split wine soaking into the tile. Chair legs scraped against the floor as someone shifted. The chandelier flickered above, pulling our shadows long and warped. Details mattered. Seat placement. Tara at the far left of the table, angled toward the living room doorway. Nearest the mantel clock, its brass hands edging toward 7:45. Witnesses. 9 people total. Positions locked in memory like evidence. I slipped a hand into my jacket pocket. Phone unlocked by habit. Screen lit, silent. I angled it once, subtle, like checking the time, but the lens caught the whole tableau. The chairs, the cake, the envelope untouched beside it, and the glass scattered shards on the tile. Flash off, sound off. One image, stored. Metadata. Time 7:36 p.m., saved to folder. At 7:41 p.m., my phone buzzed, the text from Linda's cousin. Wow, she's cold tonight. I screenshotted it instantly, dropped it into a new archive folder I titled Folder A, Locked. Backup synced to cloud. Chain of custody beginning. Conversation limped on around the ruin, people rushing to patch the silence. But I kept still. My thumb rubbed over the pocket watch again. The ticking anchored me more than their noise did. In my mind, I traced next steps that none of them noticed. The porch had a small black dome camera pointing across the entry. If I pulled the footage later, I could catch who left first, who lingered, exact timestamps. I logged that mentally. CCTV angle, verify porch coverage. I wasn't building a memory, I was building a record. Back at the table, Tara eventually looked up from her screen. Her eyes caught mine. She smirked again, a tilt, brief, confident. Then right back to scrolling, as if the moment didn't matter, as if the insult had no weight. But I had already tagged the time. I had already etched the words. I had already filed away the laugh and the cough and the silence. The line was crossed, quietly, but permanently. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the steady clock tick on the mantel. My focus narrowed not on the voices, but on the tone, the phrasing, who avoided me and who didn't. Mark's nervous humor, Linda's silence, Tara's cruelty. Every insult settled into record like ink drying on paper. At 8:02, people finally shifted toward coffee, cake, cleanup. I rose slow, careful, let them chatter. My right hand brushed the envelope again, its smooth seal still untouched. I didn't break it, not yet. A choice carved itself quiet inside of me. I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't demand she explain herself. That isn't how records work. Records wait, records hold. As I narrow my grip, around the watch in my pocket, tick steady against the blood in my fingers, I told myself one thing with calm clarity. This would not be forgotten, and I meant it. The discovery began by accident. On a gray Tuesday evening, as I bent to clean out the lower drawer of my study desk, my pocket watch chain snagged on the wood. I tugged once and heard a faint click. A panel inside the drawer shifted. I pressed the edge, and a false bottom lifted up. Underneath, taped crooked across the boards, was a brass key, small, heavy, scuffed at the teeth. The tape had dried with age, brittle enough that it snapped when I pulled the key free. I turned it over in the bulb light of the desk lamp, the brass glinting dull. I remembered it instantly. A storage locker in Topeka. I hadn't thought about it in years. I set the watch on the desk, hearing its tick echo in the silence, and studied the key again. My birthday had left the insult open on the surface, but here, in my hand, was the next step beneath it. 2 days later, Wednesday 3:15 p.m., I drove through cloud cover to the storage facility on the edge of town. Rows of corrugated steel units stretched down the gravel lot. Rain from the night before had left the air metallic. The faint smell of oil clung to the corridors between units. My shoes crunched against grit as the wind clattered a loose latch somewhere up the row. The locker door numbers were painted in fading black. When I reached 114B, I slid the key in. It fit smooth, turned sharp, clicked once, and the steel door rolled open with a groan. Inside, under the dim fluorescent strip that flickered above the aisle, sat a single weathered box. Cardboard, edges thickened with age, sealed with tape, dull and curling. My hands brushed dust away before I sliced the tape with my house key. The box opened slow. And there it was. Exhibit A. The original will, with the notarized cover sheet dated 2005, and a 2010 addendum that shifted nearly everything into Tara's name. The language neat, the font official, but my signature wavered at angles I didn't remember. Page 4 carried initials in ink I never held. Exhibit B. A folder of share certificates tied to the small construction business I ran in my 30s. Each certificate logged with a bold serial number, AX546, AX547. My name still printed in capital letters beside ownership stamps. Yet some were marked transfer pending with dates that matched years I had never agreed upon. Exhibit C. Ledger sheets. Black ink showing regular debits and round numbers, all tracked into an account that bore Tara's initials. $5,000 on April 12th. $5,000 again on May 16. The handwriting in the notes margin did not match mine. Exhibit B, ledger page 47, recorded a withdrawal labeled tuition refund. I had paid that tuition, twice. Exhibit D, a slim folder of emails, printed and clipped together, each with header info still intact. One subject line burned into me, accelerating ownership. One date, circled, March 3rd, 2012. She had contacted a lawyer of her own, years ago, about taking control as fast as possible. And then, the most damning item, comparison pages. My genuine signature side by side with a forged one. Dates overwritten, lines jerking unnaturally. My name turned into a copy of itself, ugly as theft. I stood back. The overhead light buzzed, clicking once, almost fading. My stomach turned not with sickness, but precision. A clock inside me had started. I resealed the box and drove straight to Ryan Collier's office. Ryan, my family attorney of 30 years. He met me in a dim room lined with law books, blinds drawn halfway. His voice was quiet, steady. I laid out each item on the table like a surgeon arranging instruments. "We'll need certified copies," he said. I nodded. He called in his assistant, and by 4:28 p.m., the documents were run through, embossed, and stamped with state seals. Each copy validated, each page number recorded. He attached slips of chain of custody, signed, dated, I signed too. The originals went into an envelope marked seal FENU ID 5342-AX. We placed it into his fireproof wall safe. The sound of the door closing echoed heavy. Over the next evenings, I began building the timeline at my desk at home. Wednesday night, ledger spread open, sticky notes in neon yellow attached to each relevant page. 2002, double tuition payment noted. 2010, property tax receipt logged. 2012, email header check. 2015, ledger withdrawal. I lined them side by side across my desk like rungs across a bridge. I transferred digital scans onto a USB drive, labeled it Exhibit Copy 01. I sealed it in a manila envelope, signed across the flap myself, and logged the seal time, 9:12 p.m., October 6th. I deposited the envelope in a safe deposit box the next morning at First National Bank. Ledger entry signed by the clerk. A second backup uploaded into encrypted storage. Access code changed. Notebook records written with date and time. Chain of custody was no longer abstract. It became something alive, item by item. I knew the witnesses I could lean on. Carol, the bank clerk, she had seen Tara make the clustered withdrawals. Robert, my old foreman, knew hours I worked while tuition drained. Helen, my neighbor back in 2008, had seen me alone during the pneumonia weeks. Their voices were real. They remembered. Night after night, under my lamp's dim orange glow, I rehearsed. I stood in front of the mirror, calm, clear, no excess, no waste. Exhibit A, I would say, turning the page with labels marked in bright tabs. Exhibit B, ledger page 47, withdrawal $5,000. Simple, factual, dignified. I wasn't chasing drama, I was weaving order. The smell of paper warmed by the lamp filled the study. Air stale but focused, my reflection pale, eyes locked. My pocket watch ticked on the desk beside the stacks, its case reflecting the orange glow faintly like an old coin. Before I sealed the night's work away, I reached to the sideboard and lifted the white birthday envelope she never touched, still unopened, still a weight in the story. I slid it into the evidence box, letting it rest between the will copy and the ledger tabs. A quiet symbol, nothing more, but it felt like balance. Proof of what she denied, preserved beside the proof of what she stole. When I latched the case and wrote the final date line into my ledger, my hand was calm, my breath steady. I looked once more across the pages, the copies, the backups already in place. Order sat on the desk. Record had become structure. I whispered it once, not for anyone else but me. I was ready. The same dining room. But this time, no candles flickered, no birthday cake waited. Morning light poured through the blinds, cold, sharp, cutting lines across the table where the wine glass had shattered weeks ago. The chairs were set again, almost the same places. Tara sat at the far end, arms crossed, Linda beside her, lips drawn tight. The rest of the family circled in stiff silence. The only sound was the wall clock. Tick, 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 every second loud enough to measure. I stood at the head of the table. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't clear my throat. I simply placed a leather folder on the wood, centered it carefully between us, and unfastened the clasp. The click was small, but it filled the room. A chair scraped tile as my cousin shifted his weight. No one spoke. I slid out the first set of documents and placed them down flat. Exhibit A. This is the original will, I said evenly. And here, I tapped the second, is the 2010 addendum. My lawyer, Ryan Collier, sat to my left. He nodded once, his pen tapping against the margin. Both notarized, stamped, validated March 3rd. The red seals caught the sunlight, proof pressed into paper. Tara leaned forward. That's fake. Ryan's voice was calm. Notarization verifies signatures. These carry state validation. The stamps don't lie. I let the silence linger before sliding the next set out. Exhibit B, ledger sheets, clipped in order, neon tabs marking each page. Page 47, I said. Withdrawal, $5,000, same amount here. Page 53, marked tuition refund. I placed the corresponding bank statement beside it. Numbers matched line by line. My old pocket watch ticked steady by my elbow. I set it on the table next to the documents, its sound faint but constant. Right beside it, I laid the unopened white birthday envelope. I saw Tara glance at it, then look away fast. Her tone shifted sharp. You're ruining the family with this. I didn't move. The sums don't vanish because you call them family. Mark cleared his throat, uncomfortable. The wall clock ticked louder still. I pulled out Exhibit C, screen captures printed, each with data headers intact, message logs with timestamps. 7:36 p.m. Wow, she's cold tonight. Screenshot saved, 9:12 p.m., bank transfer notification. I laid them flat, side by side. One sheet carried Carol's statement. The bank clerk who had watched Tara fill withdrawal slips. Her signature at the bottom, notarized. Ryan touched it, nodded again. You can see, I continued, chain of custody intact, certified, stamped, sealed under I-5 342-AX in Collier's office safe. Originals remain in protected storage, copies verified. The words were simple, factual, unshaken. Tara shifted. Her denial cracked at the edges. Okay, maybe I borrowed. Maybe we can split it, work something out. I met her eyes. You spoke. I saved. My voice stayed quiet. Chain of custody is sealed. Her face flushed. She dropped her gaze to the table. Linda opened her mouth to interject, then stopped. The silence pressed. Then came the collapse. Tara ran out of words, shoulders folding inward. Her hand covered her face. She whispered nothing, just sat still as the clock ticked above her and the weight of the paper spread between us. I leaned back, settled into the chair. The unused coffee on the sideboard still steamed faintly. My pocket watch ticked loud now, louder than any voice in that room. I said one line, measured and final. In the room where they erased me, the silence learned my name. And the silence held. The weeks after that confrontation did not roar. They moved with clockwork precision, quiet filings, subtle changes. A new order shaping itself one stamped page at a time. On Monday morning, 9:12 a.m., Ryan and I sat in his office under the strict light of fluorescent bars. The folder of certified documents lay between us. He pushed forward the estate revision paperwork. I signed each page, pen scratching steady. Seal ID numbers marked in the corner. The 2010 addendum naming Tara as primary heir was nullified under evidence of misconduct. By 10:47, the filings were submitted to probate court, logged as case docket number 2234. Each copy notarized, every receipt stamped, filed. By Friday, notices hit the banks. Tara's accounts, especially the ones marked with siphoned transfers, were frozen. Balance holds initiated. An investigation tagged each suspicious entry. Ledger pages with Exhibit B references were matched line for line against statement proofs. Every dollar she slipped away was now tethered to a page number, a date, a statement, a custody slip. Whispers began. This time, they didn't bend toward her defense. In the town where laughter once applauded her jokes, people leaned away. I heard it when I walked through the grocery aisle, voices muted as I passed. Sad, what she did. Shameful. Even Linda's relatives who had smirked at the birthday table now avoided her name in conversation, moving the subject to weather, to sales, to anything but the truth. By the second month, the board governing my small construction firm logged the redistribution update in official minutes. Friday, 11:32 a.m., case docket number 2234 entered the books. Tara's seat on succession was erased in one line, signed, validated. Her path into ownership collapsed under her own paper trail. The silence around our house grew sharp. Parents who had known, who had sat back and allowed her arrogance, found themselves isolated too. No visitors, no calls, no more holiday dinners filled with nodding approval. Their quiet loyalty to Tara now weighed like an anchor pulling them down. Through all this, I stayed still. I did not gloat. I did not send emails or remarks or jabs. I avoided every chance to twist the knife. That wasn't my way. Evidence did the cutting for me. At night, I returned to my desk. The evidence box sat there, leather corners worn, the weight of it familiar. One evening after all filings were complete, I opened it for the last time. Documents still neat, paper tabs still bright under the lamplight. I stacked them carefully back into order. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Page numbers squared, chain of custody slips smoothed. I noted the final entry in my ledger. Closed, 9:04 p.m., November 18th. Then I shut the lid, locked the clasp, and slid the box into the lower drawer. The sound of wood closing echoed across the basement. My hand lingered on the smooth handle, pressing it firmly once. That was the end. Morning of the next day, I stepped out onto the porch at dawn. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of wet grass. The ground was soft under my shoes where dew clung. The street was empty, still shaded in blue-gray light. I inhaled deep. No noise, no voices left to explain themselves. I walked to the car. No music on the radio. Windows cracked just an inch, the whistle of morning air slipping in. The city lay ahead, silhouette over the horizon. But my thoughts stayed measured, not triumphant, not even relieved. Calm. I thought once, plainly. Greed always digs shallow roots. It never holds for long. Another thought followed. Patience and truth last longer than noise. And I had both. That afternoon, I stood in my garden, a shovel pressed into the dirt, dry but still soft enough to turn. At my side, the sealed white envelope from my birthday, never opened, edges still sharp, a symbol of what she denied me. I set it into the ground, covered it slowly with soil, palm pressing the earth flat. Birds called faint in the trees above. I stood back, brushed dirt from my hands onto my jeans, and I said one final line, not loud, barely more than a murmur, but steady. They thought they buried me. They only handed me the soil, and with the earth closed, I walked back into my house.